Good day and welcome. Today is February 26, 2026. I am Derek Fildebrandt, the publisher of the Western Standard, and you're watching The Pipeline. I've got almost the identical normal lineup here. We've got former Western Standard opinion editor Nigel Hannaford. We've got senior Alberta columnist Cory Morgan. Filling in for Dave Naylor is David Wiechnik.
Thanks for having me.
It's confusing on the office. We got two Daves, double D. And we've also got two Johns. It gets we do this too much here. All right, we're going to be talking about two cases from human rights commissions. One in Quebec, the other in British Columbia. In Quebec, where some poor little hair salon was fined $500 for having a male and female option when booking appointments on the website, and I guess a non-binary person with no hair was not able to select an other category, and that for those, yeah. And then in British Columbia, slightly more expensive, $750,000 awarded, taken from some guy who opposes radical gender ideology and given to weird BC teachers organizations. Because he disagrees and expressed himself on social media. And that is so damaging. We're going to talk about the 9, very likely 10 referendum questions that are going to be coming up in Alberta in October. 5 of them on immigration, 4 of them on constitutional reforms, and then the final one, very likely, on independence. It's quite strange. We've had referendums before, not a lot. I don't think any place in Canada has ever had 10 at the same time. I doubt any has even had more than 2 or 3 at a time. It's new ground. But first, we're going to talk about a series of polls the Western Standard commissioned. Western Standard hired Main Street Research to poll Albertans. We did a pretty big sample size for this, asking a variety of questions. David Wiechnik we've got in today because he led most of those stories. We'll talk first maybe about the poll we asked on independence, how Albertans would vote.
Well, right off the bat, Derek, I mean, the poll, I'm just bringing it up here. If a referendum were held today in Alberta, basically 34% said that they would be for independence and 66% said that they'd remain part of Canada, which seems to be kind of similar to a bunch of other polls that we've seen recently. I think there was one that just came out today I saw that said, can't remember who did it, but they said that 80% of all Canadians that they polled wanted to see Alberta and Quebec still stay within Canada. So the numbers are kind of just varying, but I mean, for the most part, I've seen that. I think 34% are roughly around a 34% number supporting independence in numerous places, but this poll just kind of proves that point. I'm just looking here to see what the gender divide is. 73% of women actually were for remaining part of Canada, and that seemed to be a number that popped up a lot with the questions pertaining to independence. I don't know what the point is or the deal is with that exactly. I don't know, maybe if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, men... On most issues, it's not going to be clear cut, but men will skew to the right on issues and women will skew to the left on issues. And that's not just Alberta or even Canada. That's just most places in the world where people vote on things. And the Alberta independence movement's dominantly a political project. So it's going to lean right. One of the things, Cory, the poll was, it's not out of line with what we've seen before. Other polls will show it lower, though, where they just change one word. Independence or separation. I've always said that, it's like, your marriage is ended and you go to the singles bar and you can introduce yourself as single or you can introduce yourself as divorced. They mean kind of the same thing in this context, but they have a very different connotation to it. So I think that's one thing that fuels it.
Absolutely. I mean, there's lots of ways we know that you can massage polls sometimes to get results that you want. And that wasn't the case in this. It was straightforward questions. But that's where you can see some disparity between different people who have polled. and some of the outcomes. Something as minor as the question. I mean, separation sounds harsh and negative, and is an end. Yeah, but it's just likewise. It can also tell you where somebody stands as soon as you're talking to them, particularly in media. If they use the word separatist, chances are they're not terribly thrilled with the concept altogether. They use independence, maybe they're a little more receptive. It's like tar sands and oil sands.
Yeah,
if they're anti-energy, conventional energy, they're going to call it tar sands. If you're not, it's oil sands. And words count, though. These campaigns, are made to convince people to go one way or another, and we'll see these sorts of things happening. What's interesting, though, the numbers you had too, though, were on the undecideds had been removed.
Yeah, the undecided.
So that's still a large chunk that we can see a lot of momentum might happen in this next 8 months. Since we've never really had a discussion like this long.
Yeah, Nigel, wasn't our poll, it was someone else's poll, and they pulled across Canada on if Alberta should be allowed to leave and if Quebec should be allowed to leave. I guess implying that if they try to, Canada would send the army or something. I guess that's implied in that at the end of the day. Super majorities of people outside of Alberta and Quebec, super majorities across Canada say no, they should not. But notably, it was 6 to 8 points higher for refusing to allow Alberta to leave. I think there is a significant number of people probably in Alberta who would be happy for Quebec to leave. So maybe I didn't look around the crosstabs for enough detail, but it was funny to me that huge number of Canadians are like, no, they should not be allowed to, which then raises the next logical question, which is, what are you prepared to do to not let someone leave?
Well, that's precisely what I thought when I read the story this morning. It makes perfect sense that the rest of Canada would be very against allowing the province that pays the freight to leave Confederation. I mean, just the Canada Pension Plan would be the first hit. And coming right after that, the whole reason why we have such a debate about equalization in Alberta is that it doesn't work for us. We end up paying not a bit more, not that little bit more, which just makes you a good citizen, but basically paying the cost of Confederation. So you bet people in eastern central Canada understand exactly what that game is. Alberta is just about the only have province. In other words, where the money comes from. If you may indulge me in a personal anecdote, some years ago I was in Quebec, in that part of Quebec on the north side of the river, which doesn't speak English. Very, very hard to find somebody. But we noticed that as we went around the houses, everything was fixed up. It was just beautiful. They'd had an ice storm just a year or two before. Finally managed to find somebody with broken English, and they said, great, where did you get the money from? Oh, it's from the government. Well, where does the Quebec government get money from? It gets it from Alberta. So we were happily there looking around to see what we paid for. Yeah, of course they don't want us to go. Well, as you say, what are they prepared to do to keep us?
Logically, you have to be prepared to send the army if you had an army. Yeah. Well, I guess Canada is planning on having an army now, staffed with non-Canadians. We're happy to use military force against Canadians.
That's almost a little chilling. I had a Slovakian friend who, with his mandatory service in the 80s, the way they worked it with them is you're all under the Soviet umbrella, but you never got stationed in Slovakia. He got stationed in East Berlin, and likewise Polish soldiers would be in Ukraine. They would always make sure that way, in case they had to do something against the local population, there wasn't a loyalty to it. I don't think, I'm not going to read in so far thinking that's the motivation of this government. I think it's one that just doesn't know how to draw people into the military and is getting desperate. But there's some reasons to be concerned when you have people who aren't domestic in your military forces.
To that point, Cory, if they want to import people from that part of the world into the Canadian Armed Forces, they're probably going to have a bit of a tampon trouble in the washrooms. These guys are not that kind of...
True enough.
Some Slovakian guy, what is this machine here for?
Yeah. But the thing is, if you have people with that mindset, yes, you probably could deploy them against the Canadian population, and they wouldn't mind.
All right. So we have a few poll questions. There was one that was not that surprising. We'll talk the federal and provincial vote. The results on the how people would vote in an Alberta election, not, I mean, pretty good news for the UCP, pretty big lead over the NDP. The Liberals, it's funny, I guess just a residual brand recognition. They pulled like 6% or something down, but they almost don't run candidates at this point. They're effectively a dissolved party for all intents.
Yeah, it was 6%, yeah.
So I caution Conservatives that Liberal vote is likely just to vote NDP in a provincial election because they're going to go cast a ballot. They're not going to be there. But noticeably, the so-called Progressive Tory Party, the two breakaway MLAs, and the Republicans and Independence Party, both of them are like 1%. They're just total no-shows.
Yeah, I know the Republicans are 1%. The Progressives are actually 3%. But yeah, it's like not much big of a difference. Let's be honest, really. And I think the other people that would vote for another party is also polling at 1%. So again, it's just minuscule, really.
Yeah. Cory, the Progressive Tories, no, it's not really. New parties are always hard to start and get traction on. We've both been through that. But if you're going to start a new party in Canada, almost any political system, you have to come in from the edges. You have to offer something no one else is offering, and this is just like actually, quite legally speaking, it is the Alberta Party. Yeah, with a new name. They're just trying to set up Switzerland in 1917 on the Western Front. Like, there's already two big armies hacking at each other, fighting over no man's land, and you're proposing to set up your lines in no man's land where everyone's already fighting over.
Well, and it's just continuing that recipe for failure the Alberta parties had for 15 years, where they just keep saying, we're the middle. We're the middle. Well, good for you. But when people vote, they vote for this or they vote for that. And as much as, you listen to some polls, people say, I get tired of hearing from left and right and I'm in the middle. Well, perhaps, but your votes don't actually reflect that. So this progressive Tory party is going to have to stand for something if it wants to carve out a spot for itself. As it sits, it's just an area for disenchanted left-leaning, conservatives to land, and it's just not grabbing anybody's imagination. I don't expect much of it.
Yeah. The federal poll was, I think, the most interesting. It here, why don't you give us the results of the? Well, this is the Alberta voters for a federal election.
Yeah, and this is with the undecideds removed. 48% said they'd vote for the Conservative Party under Poilievre, and 45%, surprising, this was the big thing that people were talking about, said they would vote for the Liberals under Mark Carney. I have no idea where that number came from because I did not expect to see that originally when we started looking at these numbers.
Yeah, that is. I didn't believe it. I'm still highly skeptical of it. I'm becoming a little less skeptical of it, but I saw that. I don't think there's a single person alive in Alberta who has been around with the Liberals, came even anywhere close to tying the Conservatives or one of the Conservative predecessor parties like Reform Alliance, etc. This is unheard of, and I didn't really believe it. Except, we asked rough 10, 12-ish questions. We asked a bunch of questions, and the answers on those, for the most part, didn't really surprise me. Like the provincial vote intention, independence, how people felt about pensions, a number of different questions. It all lined up more or less with the conventional wisdom. And this, let me think. It's possible, Nigel, that this could be correct. I know, there were some other conservative media and some people in, the conservative sphere very upset with us for releasing this poll. To which I said, we paid to have a good poll done. And just because we didn't like the answer doesn't mean we don't release it. We're not doing propaganda for you here. We might be on the right, but we're not working for a conservative party here. That's not our job.
There are some people who'd rather not know from their doctor that they have cancer. So you're going to get a certain amount of that.
But this says there's a big, big problem for the federal Conservatives in Alberta.
Yeah, and I think where it comes from, it's just a theory, but there's a tendency when the world looks like a dark place to gather around the flag, to gather around the government of the day, in an attempt to find certainty and comfort. It's like people who build their houses beside a fort. They want to be, they're looking for protection. It's not the Alberta way, which makes this very surprising, but I still have to say that when people, first of all, the narrative around the Conservative Party at the moment is unfortunately not as strong as the Conservatives would wish it to be. There are tensions within the party, and although nobody talks about it, they're there. And then so or can we trust the Conservatives to lead us out of this? They ask themselves, what's going on with separation? What's going on with independence, whichever way you want to look at it? Is that going to affect my pension? Answer, no, it shouldn't. But at any rate, that's just my opinion. Other people have theirs, and they get scared. And then they say, well, this Carney chap seems steady. Let's just park there for a while. So I see this as a reaction to this is searching for certainty.
Well, one thing I would say as well, Derek, if I may, that was very interesting is 38% of people that were polled from the rest of Alberta, which is like rural Alberta, said that they would vote for Carney and the Liberals. That's the weird one that I cannot understand.
That doesn't make sense to me.
No.
But I think it was Angus Reid came out yesterday or something, and they didn't show the Liberals as strong in Alberta, but showed very unusual levels of strength. Yeah, kind of getting into this neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's still some hangover, I think, though. And I mean, even among Albertans, and we're seeing that attitude. There's a U.S. versus Canada state that's been fostered by the Liberals and fostered by Trump back and forth. And it kind of plays into what Nigel's saying, too. People will rally the forces. I mean, even if they're proud Albertans and they're ticked with Ottawa, when you see an external threat and when you see, some of the tensions and attitudes going on with that, you'll sometimes go to... Poilievre hasn't been able to frame himself as the person who can defend against Trump. That's been the thing hanging over his neck for a year now, and it's hitting him, I think, here as well. I think it's not so much that Albertans have turned into Liberals, but when push comes to shove, they're just not feeling confidence that Poilievre is going to stand up for their interests.
Yeah, I mean, there's a rally around the flag effect whenever there's an external threat. I mean, you remember after 9/11, George W. Bush's poll numbers, it got into the 80s, pushing towards even 90 or something. Like North Korean levels of, like, we always make fun of North Koreans, but I mean, from their perspective, they're always facing an external threat. Obviously, they're heavily propagandized, but so are we. We have a much more subtle, much more maniacal kind of propaganda here. But an external threat can do that. Perhaps it is. Some I've seen speculate in the media that it's the Alberta independence threat. The other numbers don't seem to bear that out because the UCP is doing better than the federal Conservatives in Alberta, which is not usual, actually. Normally, the federal Conservatives outperform provincial, the United Conservative Party. So this says that there is, it's not a huge number, but a significant number of people who would vote for the UCP and Danielle Smith, which is significantly more hardcore and Alberta nationalistic. And then they go and plan to vote for Mark Carney. I don't understand those people. There are switchers in all provinces.
To get them to email us if there's anybody listening. Let us know.
If you are Danielle Smith, Mark Carney voters, we want to hear from you. I want to open up your brain and examine it. I don't understand it. But, I mean, there's switchers in all provinces. But in this case, you're going from the Alberta UCP is, I mean, their fiscal stuff is terrible. We've seen the budget and all that. They're not doing great there. But on a lot of these issues, especially around Alberta, national unity, independence, Trump, all this stuff, I don't get how you vote Danielle Smith one day, then you'd vote Mark Carney the next. That's a weird voter, and I want to understand who that is.
We're in some volatile times. I mean, it's a weird mix going on. I think this year, before it's up, we're going to see some changes. I don't know exactly where the heck they're going to go, but we've never seen a period like now. That's part of why we're seeing, I think, just these strange things in the tea leaves. A year ago from now, too, though, look, when those polls first started coming out, we were dismissing, like, holy cow, look at this Liberal resurgence. And it went from down in the toilet to just shy of a majority. And little has changed in that in a year.
Yeah. Okay. Well, speaking of independence, let's talk about the big rash of referendums coming up. Yesterday, I interviewed Premier Danielle Smith. She was generous with her time. I know some of her staff wanted to keep it shorter, but she wanted to go through a lot of the individual questions to her credit. So there's 5 policy questions, mostly essentially centered around immigration issues, and Alberta taking more control of immigration, limiting migration, removing benefits from those who were not supposed to be here, and requiring people to vote for citizenship when they vote. So there's going to be a referendum on those 5 questions. And then 4 questions of a constitutional nature. abolishing the Senate, clarifying powers between the provinces and the feds, appointments of judges, things like that. And then very probably there'll be a vote on independence triggered by the Citizens Initiative at the same time. So we'll get to the timing of all of it to begin with. But I was a bit critical of the 5 immigration questions, not because I don't think they're good policies. I think they're so obviously good policies that they should do it immediately. Polls show that there's a big appetite for this in the public, not just in Alberta, but across Canada for actions on getting mass migration under control here. I'm fine with some direct democracy, particularly for constitutional questions. Constitutional questions should always go directly to the people. But this is a legislative issue, and I feel like they've got a majority. The legislature's sitting right now. They should just do it. And if the people broadly don't support it, they can start a citizens' initiative to overturn it. That's what we hire them for. So I don't know which you wants to pick it up first, but I'm against having referendums on this. Just do it. Do it now. These are urgent problems. We can't wait.
So what she actually said to you, Derek, was that she wanted to hang off on this. Basically, she wanted to get the people behind her. She didn't disagree with you that she had the legislative power to do it now. She 100% agreed. But she pointed out things have changed a bit in the last 5 years. We've got a whole bunch of people who weren't here 5 years ago. That's part of the problem, of course. But to just go out there and do this without putting it in front of the people and making a referendum out of it would just give the NDP and any other opposition, well, she's just like Trump. Are we going to get
a Nazi for it anyway? It's not going to mute any of the opposition. They called her a Nazi for putting forward a referendum on measures that are supported, I think, by even most legal and productive migrants that are here. So she's not getting anyone on side she doesn't already have.
So the subtlety here is that now that she's put it to a referendum, she doesn't have to do anything for 6 months. So that's true.
But she should be doing something. It's an urgent problem.
We're talking about the political approch. So
yeah, yes,
she's got to get to 2027. This is a. I'm not saying I agree with it, but I can see reason to advise her that way.
I get it. But Cory, yes, they were not elected. This was not in their platform. But we don't elect parties just to enact what's in their platform. We expect them to react to issues as they come along. If a problem was already there and acute before, I don't know, the NDP just bringing in a carbon tax or the federal Liberals bringing in a carbon tax that they did not run on in their platforms, that's highly questionable. And we should have the right to have an initiative petition referendum to repeal that if we want. We did not when the NDP was in. We did not with Trudeau when he did it. But we elect these people not just to rubber stamp, but to govern and to think and to react to issues as they come. The public is, I think, already on side for this stuff. These are urgently needed policies.
Or at least one. I can see, just reading at the bottom when it comes to bringing in a law requiring individuals to provide proof of citizenship in elections. Well, if you want to have something that modifies the way we can vote, why are you putting that to a vote? If this is an acute issue, we want that before you vote on this, as opposed to, that's one that you really could do tomorrow. I think realistically, we know the political game, we know communications. This allows, because she's got a lot going on the plate. She's got a budget that really, let's face it, doesn't look terribly conservative fiscally. She's just made some very large spending announcements. This is something to keep the discussion for the populists going and things like that, but still on the sideline and not trying to eat all that soup all at the same time. So they can use the legislative session, kind of as Nigel said, to chew on all the rest of this stuff, and this gets kicked down the road to deal with by referenda at the end of the year. Not saying it's necessarily the best way or most principled way, but I can understand the rationale of it.
Okay, well, let's talk about some of the rationale, particularly around the constitutional questions and the likely coming independence question. So four constitutional questions, David, and independence. I put it to Smith when I was interviewing her yesterday that, look, we had the equalization referendum a few years ago. Nothing happened. Absolutely nothing. They just ignored it. That was the end of it. Even if they didn't ignore it, Quebec has a de facto veto on any change to the Constitution. Parliament also has to sign off, not just the provinces. Parliament will never sign off on a constitutional change that does not have Quebec's blessing. So I think this is a dead end, because for Quebec to even consider it, they have it as well-established policy that they have their whole grab bag of constitutional issues that they want, and they're all very francophone nationalist stuff and asymmetrical federalism that does not treat all provinces the same. We're going back to Meech Lake and Charlottetown for the young kids, if you can remember from your history books. I was a tyke, I guess, when this stuff happened too. But it's never going to happen. But I get putting forward the idea of constitutional reform. But why would we vote on constitutional reform on the same piece of paper in which we're also voting on independence? This is like going to the courthouse, to the divorce counter, and asking for marriage counseling. No, I put it to her that we should vote on these reforms and see what the rest of Canada, see what Ottawa does, give them 3 months, 6 months, whatever, something reasonable, and then we have the vote on independence. She seemed to reject that, and it just seems to be you're doing two very different things at the same time that are mutually exclusive.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to ask you if you thought maybe she was doing that so they could put sort of a damper on the independence talk, kind of put that on the back burner, maybe, and kind of just hide it within all the other stuff. That's why they're having it at the exact same time. That was my thought. I just don't know. That's what I'm thinking. Because like you said, it's like, is anything really going to change? I don't see it change.
Well, you see, Nigel, a lot of the lefty commentators are out there saying that she's holding all of these referendums to boost the independence vote. As they've said, and I'm inclined to agree with David that I don't think she's trying to suppress the independence vote, but I think, if I'm being cynical, she is perhaps trying to mix it with a bunch of things so we're not just talking. Guess what? No one's going to be talking about the immigration reform. No one's going to be talking about constitutional reform. Everyone's going to talk about independence because it's so much bigger. We don't have to ask Ottawa for more permission over immigration if we're our own country. We don't have to talk to them about getting rid of the Senate if we're our own country. So all these other issues become completely moot. So the left is arguing she's trying to do this to bolster independence. I don't think she's necessarily trying to stop independence, but trying to mix it up. And I don't think it'll work. And I think she actually risks the success on her 9 questions she's putting forward, because everybody who's going to come out to vote against independence, the Federalist vote, I think their inclination will be to also vote pro-Ottawa down the ballot on all of the questions. I'm voting against independence, and I'm voting against taking more control of immigration. I'm voting against limiting migration. I'm voting against Senate abolition. Those kinds of things.
I don't know whether I agree with you on that, Derek. See, one of the things that she has to contend with, which you didn't mention in your summary, there is her own caucus, who are not of one mind on many of these things. There are some members of her caucus who are very much in favor of independence, and there are others who will have it at any price. Some just really want to know what their constituents think, and they can modify their position then. So how do you actually stop all this boiling over in 2026? When it would be highly inconvenient to have a split in the caucus out in the open, which other parties would take advantage of. And other parties would include, by the way, the federal Liberals, to whom it would be a tremendous advantage to have a disunited Alberta government.
I agree, but why would we be voting on tinkering with or getting rid of the Senate and tinkering with divisions of federal powers and it's not going to work. Everyone's only going to talk about independence. This is not going to work.
Derek, you are a deep thinker on these things. Cory is a deep thinker. David is a deep writer as well as a thinker on these things. So we go into this stuff with a passionate intensity and work out little angles and so forth. With all due respect to Albertan voters, most of them don't pay any attention to this except when they're told to, and even then, it's a superficial thing. So I agree. I have the
okay. So Cory, on this, in when we get into an actual campaign period for these referendums,
Yeah.
if you stopped an average person on the street and said, "How are you voting in the referendum?" Which question are they going to assume you're asking about?
Oh yeah, but I mean, getting to it, so it's going to be essentially the campaign starts now. It's an 8-month campaign. One of the things I didn't like looking at this too, I just did it while you doing your intro, but I just did a quick check. When you add the questions together, there's about 400 words among them. Talk about word salad questions. This is why the Clarity Act was created in the first place. I mean, at least the independence question actually is bang. It's yes or no. And that's where 90% of the discussion is. But we're going to have 8 months talking about some of these things, which, yes, we know. They go asking if the other provinces will be willing to abolish the Senate. We know that's not going to happen in a million years. The Atlantic provinces and Quebec are never going to go for that.
Well, there's actually a Supreme Court of Canada reference made that can't be done.
Yeah, so let's remind Albertans all of that as we're approaching an independence vote, the futility of trying to change these things, the futility, plus having the Andrew Coynes and the others up there poo-pooing it and saying, you guys can't choose your judges, you guys can't have these things. And after 8 months of that discussion, and as Derek said, there's really only one question that's going to be on people's minds when they go into that booth. I think in the long run, this will help because we got to accept the complete intractability of the rest of the country, or you vote for independence. That's the two questions you're going to have.
But you should vote for one first. Give them 3 months, 6 months, whatever, to at least signal their willingness to talk. Guess what? Yeah. They're not going to. But let Albertans see that first.
Ideally, it'd be great. I mean, I'd slap these out in June, and then we could have 3 months to chew on it before we go to it. I'm fine with that.
That'd be fine. Let's do it. Yeah, let's do it in June, whatever it is.
But we got to work with what we got.
But with due respect, Nigel, this is not, camouflaging is not going to work here. When you ask someone on the street, how are you voting in the referendum? Everybody's going to assume you're asking about independence, not about one of the other 9 questions on immigration or the Senate or judge appointments. Every single person is going to go to that last question, independence. That's what I was going to talk about. So camouflage. If the strategy here is to camouflage it, I don't think it's going to work.
Well, we'll see, I guess. But I do think if you go and you stop a stranger on the street and said, "How are you going to vote on the referendums?" he's probably going to say at this stage, "Well, I don't understand a lot of them, and I thought we couldn't vote on the Senate anyway." But yeah, I'm still making my mind up about independence. It'll be
the average voter's not even going to know there's a vote on this.
I was going to say what referendum?
Yeah, they're not even going
to say. Well, that's their worst ones.
Exactly.
There's something interesting to keep in mind too, though. So the Quebec referendum in 95 had a 93% turnout. When a question is that important, people will get off their butts. So they're going to be in that booth and they're going to look at these as well. If it was just these, I think you'd have a 40% turnout because people are already bored and their eyes have glazed over.
Yeah.
But when you got that nuclear option at the back of all those questions, this is going to spawn a discussion of these issues we've never had before, really, in a way we haven't had before anyways. And it might make a difference.
All right, let's switch to something funnier. People having to give up their houses to pay out offended teachers for not agreeing with trans ideology. Nigel, yeah, I mentioned at the top of the show, 2 cases. One a lot pricier than the other, but both absolutely absurd, where people are having to pay for not complying with gender ideology.
So what we've got going on here is 2 cases of compelled speech. We'll like to talk about freedom of speech, so we can say what we think without fear of penalty. What we've got now is government agencies telling us what we must say. This is no longer about what whether we dare say what we think. This is about, do we dare not say what the government is telling us to think? So what we got here, you mentioned 2 cases. One was in Quebec. So as a little hairdresser's shop, you go online and making your booking. Are you a male or are you a female? Because it'll make a difference.
Not better hair, but yeah.
So somebody, and I think when you told the anecdote, you said that this person was without hair.
Let's put a picture up.
Yeah, let's see.
This guy or girl or whatever
he says he is
wanted a haircut. What's he go to a barber at all for?
Well, it's just another level almost of the ball waxer there.
Anyway,
you're just going beyond the pale with your requests.
Another British
back in Quebec, they do they're a little crazy anyway, I think. But so the thing goes to court, and the little hairdresser shop gets fined $500 because they didn't have an option and said pick a.
And they apologized,
And they,
and they had fixed the website and added his none of the above kind of option or whatever it is,
this is probably,
and they still fined them $500.
they probably went to the trouble of fixing the website because they saw what was going on in BC, which is the
Yeah.
really outrageous one. Like, you don't screw with this stuff unless you are
Tell us about
a passionate one.
BC.
Well, BC is a school district, Chilliwack school trustee. His name is Barry Neufeld, and is ordered by the BC Human Rights Tribunal to pay not $500, not even $5,000, but $750,000 to LGBTQ, if I got that in the right order, educators for.
You forgot the plus.
There's a 2 and an S in there as well. Sorry. Yeah, poor research. Anyway, why does he have to pay them? Well, for injury to dignity, feelings, and self-respect. And what had he been doing? For some time, he has publicly criticized the educational programs in BC schools as child abuse because they encourage children to consider, are you sure you're a boy? Are you sure you're a girl? You can talk to us. You don't have to talk to your parents. He calls that child abuse. And he labeled gender fluidity a biologically absurd theory. And he opposed medical transitions for minors, which is what we, of course, oppose here in Alberta as well, thanks to the Danielle Smith government. So all of this that the tribunal deemed as an existential denial of trans identities. Terms like gender ideology is seen as fostering discrimination. Now, let's just remind ourselves that however, whether you're a short earther or a long earther, nobody has questioned the idea of gender for about 500,000 years. In the last 20, it has become fashionable to say, well, if a person thinks he's a woman, then you must treat him as a woman. And if a woman thinks she's a man, you must give her credit for her feelings on this matter. It is somebody sticking a gun into your head and saying, you will either repeat after me something that you know to be totally inaccurate, totally wrong, something that you don't even agree with, or we're going to take your house.
And so, David, the great totalitarian regimes of the 20th century often banned speech. Idi Amin, actually, I have to admit, he was kind of funny in a way. He says, I can guarantee freedom of speech. I just can't guarantee freedom after speech. So, he has moments, I guess. But, the great totalitarian regimes would ban speech, but they wouldn't generally compel speech. You weren't allowed to criticize the regime or the dictator or their policies or whatever, but the average person was not required to go around and chant the slogan for the most part.
Yeah.
That's where we're at. We've skipped kind of hard totalitarianism and gone into whatever this
they call
is.
it. Well, I keep hearing it online. They call it gay race communism. It's quite a bit different than regular communism, it would seem. And I was just going to say as well, like that first case Nigel brought up about the guy apologizing and still like them getting fined. It's like that's why you never apologize to these people because you enabled them and you're still going to get screwed over anyway.
He probably would have gotten, to Nigel's point, he was probably looking at the case in BC of $750,000.
Yeah, and he's like, yeah, I got
so he got off with his slap on the wrist of $500. I think now he might be kind of fighting it because he's like, okay, this is ridiculous. But
well, it was like, remember that case of those bakers in the States with the whole like Islamophobia thing? It's kind of the same thing. Did they apologize because they wouldn't bake the cake for the gay couple, gay marriage couple? That
was the slippery slope. I don't think the slippery slope was gay marriage. People had their concerns. It happened, and the sky didn't fall, and that was okay. But people did warn of the slippery slope. And where the slope started to get slippy, I think, was the cake.
Yeah, the cake.
Because this was not about, gay marriage, people arguing for it said, this is not going to affect your marriage. You don't have to do anything. This is other people doing their own thing. And as soon as someone else had to do something to affirm what they wanted to do in their private lives for it, that opened the door. And that's where we are now with gay race communism, where you get fined $750,000 for wanting to keep gender weighing studies out of the third grade class.
Well, and it's what's distressing with this, though, is the extreme they went to. They aren't trying to just inconvenience or punish. They're trying to crush him. Those are bankruptcy numbers. These are lose your home, lose your retirement, live in penury for the rest of your life in some shack, unless you were somehow very independently wealthy when you've been nailed by something like this. I would only hope that it's appealable just in the extreme of the punishment.
I think you can take it to a court. I doubt a court's going to uphold it, but I mean, it shows you how mad the BC Human Rights Commission.
And these commissions shouldn't exist, period. They shouldn't. That's the whole thing, too. We shouldn't legitimize these or quasi-judicial kangaroo courts.
Well, I think you said Judge Judy.
Yeah, I have more faith in her.
You would get a more fair trial with Judge Judy.
But, we should just have one judicial system anyways, not this human rights crap that's usually appointees who are extreme of one ideology or another who sit on these things.
And by the way, when a tribunal hears these cases, they are not bound by the procedural techniques of a court.
No.
There's no business of you may be able to demonstrate that what you're saying is true, but that doesn't matter.
Truth is not a defense if it exposes an identifiable group to hatred or contempt.
Mm-hmm.
Truth is not a defense. You can prove that what I said is true, but if it exposes an identifiable group to hatred or contempt, you're guilty.
Well, I hold the commissions in contempt.
Yeah. And this is just a good reminder, back in the Western Standard's first version, when it was a print magazine, the Human Rights Commissions and Tribunals came for the Western Standard for being the only publication in Canada to publish the Muhammad cartoons. And those commissions almost went down over that because they finally crossed the bridge too far. They weren't just going after some unsympathetic figure, printing anti-Semitic leaflets on, through a fax machine or something. They went after a legitimate news outlet, sharing a legitimate news story, and they went a bridge too far. But it just goes to show you have to defend those unsympathetic figures who are maybe doing something you don't agree with, because, to quote Rachel Notley, first they came for the anti-Semites, then they came for the capitalists, All right, our parting shots. We're going to give first.
Okay, well, this is one that I think you guys can agree that I'm getting annoyed with hearing about, is all these people that are on the Alberta independence petition, their canvassers, are getting harassed by people. And now Mitch Sylvester, the CEO of the Alberta Prosperity Project, had a guy come into his store in Bonnyville with a bullet and threaten him. Where was any of this for the Forever Canada petitioners? I never heard a single thing about that ever happening to them. So what's the difference?
I'd pull over. I'd see him on the side of the road, kind of a country road in the way of my place. I'd pull over. Say hi. How's it going?
Smile and wave.
Although I have seen, we maybe need to follow up with the story. I have seen it alleged it was not an actual bullet. I talked to Mitch to clarify it was an actual bullet. That guy's actual bullet.
That actual video. That's not the guy. It's not even the same guy now.
Okay, interesting. All right, Cory.
Well, it just kind of ties into where you're going, I think, in a bit. But if people aren't familiar with John Cleese from Monty Python or Fawlty Towers, and I know he's never been a conservative with his political views, but boy, this last week has he let loose, including on that $750,000 ruling saying he may not tour Canada because of that. Because again, as much as he might be a lefty, he values free speech, and he's ripping into Islam just brilliantly. So follow him on X because he's pulling back all political correctness, him and Rowan Atkinson as well. So the old English comedians at least are standing up. Might be too late, but at least they're speaking out.
Mr. Bean, symbol of freedom. His speeches might not be good. Although I'll never forget, I'm sure you've all seen that one clip. It was Rowan Atkins, not as Mr. Bean, but Rowan Atkins, and he was speaking at a Tory convention in the 80s.
I haven't seen that.
Oh, it's such a classic. It's such a classic. All right. Hey.
Brilliant defense.
Yeah.
So look, watched the State of the Union address last night, despite the intense difficulty.
You watched the whole thing?
Yeah, we were working.
This is how we know you're retired.
Yep. This is I don't know whether it was Telus or whether it was the originating. It was a horrible thing to have to watch. But what Trump said appealed to me. What didn't appeal to me was the response by some Democrats who couldn't even rise to say, well, at least that kid is all right, or that kid has done well, or this fellow deserves his medal. And it took me back. I haven't thought about this for a very, very long time, but when General Grant became president, Ulysses Grant, after this American Civil War. Finally, he died. He was reckoned to have been a good president, and 2 Confederate generals were among the pallbearers as he left the church. So it is possible for Republicans and Democrats to get together over things that are possible. It was possible back in the 1870s. There's something about the Democrat response there. They can't even applaud something that's good. It makes me think the problems in the United States are a lot deeper than we think.
And just on that, a tip of the hat to the cameraman at the speech. I didn't watch the whole speech as it was way too long, but Trump had these moments where he talked about, I'm quoting Trump here, it's not me, talking about Somali pirates ransacking Minnesota, and he hands to Ilhan Omar, who's crashing out, and he talks about the absurdity of transgendered ideology, and he pans to, I think, a Democratic member of Congress who is a biological man but dresses as a woman. That cameraman better hope J.D. Vance stays president, because he's not going to be filming many more of these things. I mean, it was ballsy. Okay, mine. I want to draw a note to those of you who have not been paying attention to the United Kingdom's newest political party, Restore Britain. There was a lot of hope, and maybe there still is some, for Nigel Farage's Reform Party, or Nigel Farage led Brexit for years, did God's work. Leads the Reform Party now, which has been leading in kind of minority government territory in the UK, completely eclipsing the Tories. The Tories look headed for kind of liberal democratic, Lib Dem, third party, fourth party, extinction status. Was really going for it, but he just didn't seem to have a religion on things like remigration, the key issue, remigration. And he kicked out a member of parliament. Was it Lowe? What's his name? The MP. Anyway, he kicked this guy out. This guy has now gone on to start his own party. He kicked this guy out because this guy supported remigration. This guy has gone on to start Restore Britain. Brilliant social media campaign from these Rupert Lowe, yeah. Brilliant social media campaign in the span of, I think the party's roughly a week, maybe 2 weeks old. It's less than 2 weeks. It's already 7% in the polls. 3 times with the polls with the Alberta's progressive Tories are. Already like really hitting the mat. My fear is, of course, you've now got the Tories, you've got Reform, and you've got Restore. And first past the post system, that's not a recipe for success. But neither is doing what the UK's been doing, which is leading it to civilizational extinction. So they've got to do something radical. But I just want to point out Restore UK, just the absolute, they've come down like a meteorite on the UK British scene, and I think we're going to hear a lot more about them in the next years. Okay, Cory, David, Nigel, thank you. And thank you, John, running in the studio here. And all of you watching from home or your elliptical, whatever you're doing, thank you very much for joining us. Remember to go to westernstandard.news, click on subscribe. It's only $10 a month or $100 a year for unlimited access to all Western Standard content, getting past that paywall. And to support the work we are doing, we've now got full-time staff, full-time reporters in Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, Regina, Toronto, Ottawa. We're spreading like the plague. All right. Thank you very much for joining us today, and God bless.